everybody. I'll call the meeting to order. Senate State Government Finance and Policy and Elections Committee, today being Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021. And so welcome everybody to State Government. Want to let you know we're going to flip two bills on the order here. So the governor's budget, Senate File 974, will go before Senate File 1422. We're just flipping those two. So if any governors, commissioners, et cetera, are online, you're going to go up a little earlier, and then I'll go later as chair of the committee. I'm here, so we'll just save it for them. With that, members, we're going to be ready to go ahead and get started. And we have Senate File 565. And Senator Osmic, would you do the motions, please? Just move Senate File 565.
Okay, you haven't asked me to do this yet, so I'm sort of out of habit. Yes, Madam Chair, so move the bill. All
right, Senator Ingebrigtsen, welcome to the committee. Glad to have you here today. And Senator Ingebrigtsen, just say, you know, the routine, your name and title for the record, and then go ahead and present your bill, Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Bill Ingebrigtsen, bringing to you today Senate File 565. I certainly appreciate you hearing the bill, Madam Chair and members, and it's a pretty straightforward bill. I know the old cliche that it's a good bill, but it's pretty straightforward. And I think on the front pages, you'll see it's the telecommunications working group. It's the forming of a working group that's going to go ahead and meet over the next short while. And the duties that they're going to do with these E911 dispatchers, as you know, are very crucial to law enforcement, to fire, to emergency services, and it has become a real specialized area of work. And I can attest to that. I mean, I go way back from when all they did was one or two functions in the dispatch to now many different functions that are both life-saving and you know, they just do. I mean, there's just so much going on. So the duties of the working group is to submit a report to the chairs and the ranking minority members of the legislative committees with jurisdiction over public safety policy and finance by January 15th of next year. And it should include the recommendations, a statutory definition of a 911 communicator, recommend a minimum training and continuing ed standards for certification of 911 telecommunicators, recommend standards for clarification of 911 telecommunicators, recommend funding options for mandated 911 telecommuter training, and provide other recommendations the working group deems appropriate. Department of Public Safety will actually be participating here, the Commissioner of Public Safety, and they must provide a administrative support for the working group, and the group does expire in January 15th of 2022. Members, there's not a lot of cost to this. There's no per diems, there's no mileage. I'm sure maybe the departments will pay their own, whoever they appoint to this particular committee. I do have today, Madam Chair, if you wouldn't mind, I do have one, I think there's one testifier from the Washington County Sheriff's Office. I hope she's here. There's a list of everybody, a lot of people here. Darlene Pankeny.
Well, Senator Ingebrigtsen, the purpose that this bill comes before this committee isn't as much the purpose of the work group, but its structure.
Okay, sure.
And so we're glad to, if we briefly had someone who wanted to testify, but mainly focus that they feel that the structure is well established. That's the main purpose for this.
Yeah, and I know you're busy, so why don't we just stay focused with that? And I know this bill, if recommended to pass, is going to go to finance, and there may be more questions there the testifier could handle.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, members, I stand for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Senator Ingebrigtsen. Members, any questions in regards to the structure of this work group? Senator Clausen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question for Senator Ingebrigtsen about how are the 911 telecommunications folks currently trained?
Senator Ingebrigtsen, briefly.
Thank you. They're trained basically from department to department. There is no state standard training that I know of. I know they've been trying to do this for a long time. They've come from flip cards for emergency calls, if you will. You know, if you have a heart attack, we go to the heart attack and flip it down to having this all on computer. We all know how these people now are so acclimated to computers, but there is no one specific way of doing it, and that's really kind of the whole point here. If there gets to be any kind of a disaster like the 94 bridge going down, everybody would be communicating on the same page, and the dispatchers would be dispatching according to a protocol.
Thank you, Senator Ingebrigtsen. Senator Clausen, do you have any questions in regards to the structure of the work group itself?
I was just going to say, Madam Chair, that this looks like a good bill, something that's needed to provide some structure to these folks. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Senator Clausen. That's exactly what, I appreciate that. And I know in the last committee where we heard this bill, I happened to be there, we added the Association of Minnesota Counties. So I think that was a good addition for this particular task force. Members, any other questions about the structure of this work group? Okay, seeing none. Senator Osmic, would you please make the motion? And it goes to finance.
To finance, okay. Madam Chair, I would move Senate File 565 be recommended to pass by this body and referred to finance.
On that motion, members, please unmute yourself and be sure you are on camera. On that motion, all those in favor of Senate File 565, please say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign. All right. Thank you very much, Senator Ingebrigtsen. You're on your way to finance. I will see you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members.
Mhm. Okay, members, the next bill that we have before us is Senate File 746, Senator Koran. And Senator Koran, you can go ahead and do the motions for your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move Senate File 746.
Thank you, Senator Koran. Go ahead and present your bill. And I see that you also have two testifiers. So we will, members, to let you know, this is going to be laid over, so there won't be a vote. But if you can hold your questions to after the presentation of the bill and the two testifiers. With that, Senator Koran, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And 746 is a bill that looks at the way organizations are licensed to conduct charitable gaming and are evaluated in regards to the application of proceeds from lawful gaming, and so also known as the star rating system. The process is, the changes are measure ratio of lawful purpose expenditures to allowable expenses. Some of the changes are the amount spent on lawful purposes and the amount spent on lawful expenses. Section 1 modifies the thresholds for each star rating category. In addition, Section 1 excludes two categories of the 26 lawful purposes expenditures listed in statute. These two categories include certain local, state, and federal taxes and fees. Finally, the section limits the consequences for a low measurement of to organizations with gross receipts from lawful gaming of more than $750,000 in a fiscal year. And Madam Chair, what the goal is the program's been around for a while, and it's really, the goal is to look at it and accurately reset and reflect or add more value to the star rating system, so it more accurately reflects an organization's health and its goals, or its how it's meeting its mission, and then it'll drive more dollars to the intended purpose of the stated goals of the particular charitable organizations. And so with that, Madam Chair, we have Mr. Getman, and he can cover the details of the benefits of making this change and kind of updating and revising where we're at, and the impact of organizations who was the greatest concern of those that are in a probationary period. And I think the concerns were, does this increase or decrease those in a probationary period and the overall impact of this proposed change. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to bring forward Mr. Getman.
Okay, welcome to the committee, Mr. Getman. And again, your name and title for the audio record, and then go ahead and present.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Koran, for sponsoring this bill.
Sorry to bother you, but are you able to be on camera or because you're just audio? I didn't know. Sometimes people forget.
I can, and sometimes, Madam Chair, it takes away from the connectivity. If it's okay, Madam Chair, can I leave it on audio only?
Absolutely, you can. I just wanted to be sure. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you. You can go ahead.
Please, thank you, Madam Chair. And I know it's a little bit disconcerting to not have a face, and so I appreciate your patience, Madam Chair and Senators. Thank you, esteemed colleagues. Again, Matt Getman, the Gambling Control Board from Minnesota's Executive Director. And Senator Koran summed it up very succinctly, and I'll try to do just as well here. The bill, one of the proposals as part of this bill is to recognize the smaller organizations that have made up about a third of those organizations that were put on probation. So specifically, this bill exempts those organizations who have less than $750,000 of gross receipts from being put on probation. It would not exempt them from actually getting the oversight, the encouragement, the coaching that the board staff continue to do with all organizations. They would literally be able to avoid getting put on probation because they may be saving up money for that second or third year larger purchase. And so with that, one other misnomer that's out there is that an overall flood of organizations would be put on probation under this new ratio. And that's not the case. In fact, when we were running numbers based on the 21 numbers that have been coming in, there'll actually be less organizations put on probation. But the other point that Senator Koran made is that this really is a reset. This is an opportunity to refocus and recognize those organizations who are truly spending more money on the lawful gambling funds that go to the actual organization's charitable missions than others. And so today we have roughly 3/4 of the organizations, the 1,150 organizations under the current 5-star rating system that receive 4 or 5 stars. And under the new system, we're looking at shifting that. So instead of the 75% getting 4 or 5 stars, the 75% would get 1, 2, or 3 stars. And again, 0 stars would be those organizations who failed to spend at least 20 cents on lawful purpose expenditures, their mission requirements, excluding taxes and fees, as compared to the amount of money they're spending on allowable expenses. So in other words, for every dollar that they're spending on allowable expenses, they would need to spend at least 20 cents on the mission requirements, excluding taxes and fees, in order to stay out of probation. And again, the misnomer, there will be less organizations based on the numbers that we're seeing so far that would be under that 20 cents or would be on probation under the current scenario.
You're meaning 20%, right, Mr. Getman?
Yeah, yes, 20 cents on the dollar or 20%, Madam Chair. Exactly. Yes, Madam Chair. And so for every dollar that's spent on the wages, on the cost of the goods sold, on the rent, on the accounting fees, for every dollar that they would spend on those various allowable expenses, they would have to spend at least 20 cents or 20% on a mission requirement, the other 24 lawful purposes other than the taxes and fees. And so with that, this was a challenge given to me when I first started about 1.5 years ago, is what did I think of the star rating system? And of course, being brand new 1.5 years ago, I said, I don't know, let me look at it. And it turns out several of my staff had been looking at this. And with the transition of various fees over the years, with the transition of rent, transition of manufacturing costs, the introduction of electronic gaming, we ended up looking at it. And what we found is that it was warranted to change the star rating system to truly recognize those organizations that are spending 1,000% or more of the amount they're spending on allowable expenses on the mission requirements. These are organizations who are donating their prizes. They're not renting space. They're not paying exorbitant amounts of money for any other allowable expense. They're literally getting all of the dollars to their mission requirements. And those are the organizations that would get the 5 stars. They wouldn't have to be spending 1,000%. It's dollar for dollar would get you 5 stars under the new proposed system. So the allowable expense for every dollar that's spent there, if you're spending $1, if the organization, the licensed organization is also spending $1 or more on the mission requirements, excluding taxes and fees, then they would achieve the 5 stars. And under the new system, when we ran the numbers, there'd be over 10% of the organizations that would get the 5 stars. So it's not like we would limit this to an unachievable level. again, over 10%, around 170 of the charitable organizations that are licensed today, of the 1,150 roughly that are licensed today, would get 5 stars. And that's the proposal. So this challenge that I was given when I first started of looking at the star rating system and see if it actually recognizes those organizations who are contributing back to their mission requirements, the response was with this bill. And so this bill will allow, again, organizations to get recognized for that achievement of getting those fundraising dollars from this lawful gambling activity back to their mission requirement. And Madam Chair, I stand ready for any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Madam
much,
Chair?
Mr. Getman and Senator Koran.
Madam Chair, Mr. Getman, could you cover the one piece? We talked about the probation in a previous discussion. How many are in probation today and how many would be on probation under the new rating system?
Mr. Getman.
Madam Chair, Senator Koran, thank you. So the numbers, we've got it broken down for fiscal year 19, fiscal year 20, and then of course, fiscal year 21 hasn't ended yet. But for fiscal year 19, there were roughly, and I'll get you the exact numbers here. There were roughly 60 organizations that would have been put on probation. And I believe the number is there would have been roughly 80 organizations under the new ratio that would be put under probation. And under that scenario, that includes those organizations that are currently grossing less than 750,000. So I don't have that exact number, Senator Cram, but I can give that to you if you will allow me a couple of minutes to be able to pull that up.
Thank you, Mr. Getman. You can do that. Senator Koran, should we go to the next testifier or did you have something else?
No, Madam Chair, I think that'd be fine.
Okay, our next testifier is Mr. Lund. Mr. Lund, welcome to the committee. Glad to have you with us today. Just state your name and title for the audio record and then proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Committee members, thank you for your time today. My name is Alan Lund. I'm the Executive Director of Allied Charities of Minnesota. We're a 501c6 organization that represents licensed gaming charities in Minnesota. Allied Charities opposes Senate File 746, a bill being sponsored by the Gambling Control Board that would change the current rating star system for charities. If enacted, Senate File 746 would no longer take into account our largest single expense, the taxes and fees that we are required to pay when computing our rating. The current rating system takes into account lawful purposes, which is our donations, taxes, and fees, as a percent of our net receipts, sales minus prizes, to determine our rating. The proposed system takes only donations as a percentage of allowable expenses to determine our rating. The Allied Charities understands those that think that licensed charitable gambling organizations need to get more money to the bottom line for mission and community. Charities want that too. We welcome charities being evaluated, but we believe that the entire expense structure needs to be considered when looking at the ability of a charity to serve. Allied Charities has offered alternatives that, prior to organizations being rated, would remove mandates that charities must pay in order to conduct charitable gambling in Minnesota. We must pay our taxes and fees. We must store our played games for a minimum of 3.5 years. We must pay for our games, rent, bar ops, and electronic revenue share. If a charity has more than $750,000 in sales in a fiscal year, they are required by law to have an external audit conducted by a CPA, and that audit must be paid for. All of these things lessen our ability to get money to our bottom line for mission and community. The Osseo Lions, of which I am a member, does not own a building and has one site, a local bar. Monthly, the Osseo Lions must pay rent to the bar, a bar electronics operation fee, and an electronics revenue share fee that totals over $10,000. That's $120,000 annually that the Lions do not have available for donations through no fault of their own. The Osseo Maple Grove American Legion, of which I am also a member, has one site and pays none of those costs. Using the proposed rating system, a person not familiar with either organization could come to a conclusion that the Legion, 5 stars under the current system, 5 stars under the proposed system, is a better steward of funds than the Lions, who are 4 stars under the current, but would only be 1 star under the proposed rating system, when in reality, both are extremely well-run organizations, but dealing with very different circumstances. This is not a fair and equitable comparison. If enacted, the average organization would go from 4 stars under the current system of a 1 to 5-star system to 1 star under the proposed system, 0 to 5 stars. We also question the timing of this bill. These are unsettling times for all of us. Charities do not know what the future holds, and many of us have been holding additional funds in reserve in order to survive the pandemic with the goal of serving far into the future. We all hope that a rating system that is fair and equitable to all charities can be developed, and Allied Charities stands ready to help with that. If this bill were to be progressed, we would ask an effective date no earlier than July 1, 2023 be given in order for charities to have time to react and attempt to comply with the change. There is currently a charitable gambling tax bill being offered in the Senate, Senate File 1322, that gives relief to charities on our taxes, but also changes the star rating system to help ensure that all of that relief would go directly into mission and community, which we all would want. Senate File 746 does not do that. I thank you for your time today, and using the 2020 numbers and the proposed system, I provided you a list that the charities that if it was in effect would be on probation using the fiscal 2020 numbers. And I come to it, and mine off their spreadsheet comes to 98 charities.
Thank you,
And they were
Mr.
all with more than $750,000 in volume. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lund. Senator Koran, do you or Mr. Getman, would you please respond to Mr. Lund?
No, thank you, Madam Chair. And
Senator
Mr. Lund, as you know, we do share the same values in trying to grow the organizations and to make sure that you guys have. We also do, it will not diminish our desire to seek the relief on the level of taxation in the future. But this one, I think it was a good way to have a great conversation to make sure that the organizations are performing and to address the critical issues that you have identified as well. So we will certainly continue to work. We don't, at the end of the day, we don't want to harm any organization at all. So that's, you have our commitment as you have had since entering into this arena. So, Madam Chair, we'll continue to work on those challenges, make sure we don't harm anybody, and that we treat everybody fairly.
Okay, another question for you, Senator Koran. Senate File 1322 reduces taxes and also changes the star rating system. I will consider that kind of language as well. It may come before this committee also. I'm not sure yet, but I would certainly want that to get some information about that as well. And I would concur with that. And members, any questions here at this time? This bill is going to be laid over and then they'll have time to work these things out.
Madam Chair, this is Matt Getman.
Mr. Getman.
Would you like me to give some of those numbers back as well as respond to anything, or Senator Koran?
Yes, I did offer that. And so yes, Mr. Getman, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Koran. And thank you, Mr. Lund, for asking some of those questions and posing some of those issues. Back to the original question, in 2019, there were 39 organizations that were put on probation. Under the new ratio, there would have been 53, so 14 more organizations that would have been put on probation out of 1,150. However, that doesn't recognize what Mr. Lund had brought up, which was the large amount of retained cash that these organizations have kept, and this was before COVID. And so organizations typically will keep a large amount of funds available. And those organizations that would have been able to pay another few $1,000s, multiple thousands of dollars to get them out of probation would have brought that number into the teens. So it would have been 1/3 of the number of organizations would have been on probation under this new requirement if those organizations knew that that was the requirement to get out of probation. And so, Madam Chair and Senator Koran, the answer to your question is it would have gone from theoretically 39 down to 1/3 of that amount, or roughly 14 total organizations who would have been in probation under the new system. Mr. Lund had also mentioned a couple of other issues. One is that the special interest groups and also the organizations continue to work with the board, and we are obviously open to continuing to work with everyone in the industry in order to come up with that impartial rating system. And so that's exactly what this new proposed system would do, is to take taxes, take the fees out of the equation. But as Senator Koran had mentioned, it's a clean slate. It's a restart. It's not comparable to the current ratio. It's a totally new ratio. And based on that new ratio, the stars themselves are just getting shifted so that we don't have the bulk, the new standard, the new norm is not getting 5 stars. So as an industry as a whole, roughly 50% of the money that was being spent on lawful purposes, including taxes and fees, was allocated as compared to the allowable expenses. So for every $1 allowable expenses, there was 50 cents that was being spent on the taxes, fees, and other 24 lawful purposes. So the average for the industry was getting 5 stars. That in no way differentiates and recognizes, which was the challenge given to me, those organizations who are truly giving thousands of percent of what they're spending on allowable expenses for lawful purposes. And that was the intent. And so at the end of the day, we are open to any change. SF 1322 that was mentioned as well adds on a lot of other tasks, but the ratio itself is absolutely doing something similar. It is lowering the taxes, but then it's changing the corresponding percentages in order to guide those organizations to do something with that freed up money. And so it's meant to do that. The bad part about SF 1322 is it will likely drive a lot more organizations into probation. And we've run some numbers there as well. And I can present those should the SF 1322 be heard, and I'd be allowed to testify for that. Madam Chair, stand ready for any other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Getman. I think that was very helpful to have that kind of analysis. And members, this bill is being laid over. And so Mr. Lund, Mr. Getman, and Senator Koran will continue working on it and come to some sort of resolution. I would say, though, that if everybody gets 5 stars or a large percentage do, the idea was, that not as many would get the 5 stars and so on, but not necessarily. If they're all well run and they meet the criteria, then that's just all that much the better. So with that, members, I don't see any other questions at this time. So I will lay Senate File 746 over. And thank you very much, Mr. Lund, Mr. Getman. Thank you, Senator Koran.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for testifiers.
All right, members, our next bill on the agenda, as you know, we did do some changing of the order of the bills. So the next one we're going to have is Senate File 974. And I will hand over the gavel to Senator Howe for the presentation of 974. I will move 974 just to place it in front of the committee. And Mr. Chair, I also have an amendment, the A1 amendment, and I move the A1 to 974. It's a changing of some numbers, and this was given to me. Again, members, this is the governor's budget. As a courtesy to the governor, I have taken chief authorship of 974, and this amendment, I will move the A1 to 974.
And I take it this is the author's amendment, and it's so members, if all those in favor of adding the A1 amendment to Senate File 974, raise your hand and vote aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay, and raise your hand. The motion carries, and the A1 is amended to Senate File 974. Senator Kiffmeyer, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will start with having Mr. Ingebrigtsen, our fiscal analyst for the committee. Mr. Ingebrigtsen will walk the committee through the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andrew Ingebrigtsen, the fiscal analyst for the State Government Committee. I'm going to share my screen, but I believe the spreadsheet identifying change items in the state government area has been shared with committee members. So I just want to walk through this spreadsheet, but before I begin, I do just want to know, and also let me just confirm, Mr. Chair, is the spreadsheet pulled up?
Yes, it is.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead.
So I just want to note that what the spreadsheet reflects is going to be the items in the state government area as identified by Senate jurisdictions. So if you're following along in Senate File 974 strictly, you may see some items that actually fall in other committees' jurisdictions. This just pulls together those portions that are in the state gov area. So just to orient everybody here for a second, this is the change items only spreadsheet for the state government committee. There is a much more detailed spreadsheet that identifies agency bases and the change items and totals that's available on the Senate Council Research and Fiscal Analysis website. Today, we'll just walk through these change items. You'll see on the left side, the bold headings are going to be the agencies that we're looking at. The indented portions are the individual change items. And over here on the right are a set of columns. The isolated column is any change that's identified for the current fiscal biennium, fiscal year, fiscal 21. The three white columns identify the biennium for which we are appropriating this year. This is fiscal 22 and 23. And then finally, the green columns are going to be the tails, fiscal 24 and 25. I will focus on these white columns for the budget period in this presentation. So first, you'll see that the governor has proposed a reduction to the legislature's budget at the Office of the Legislative Auditor of $2.488 million. This is in conjunction with another change item that will appear a little lower. This would transfer responsibilities for the single audit of federal funds from the legislative auditor to MMB, but not to MMB itself, but for them to hire an outside firm to conduct the audit. Then under the state auditor, you'll see 4 change items. The first is an operating adjustment. This is going to be a recurring one, and so I just want to call it out briefly here. When we see these operating adjustments, what we're talking about is the growth in operating costs that are experienced by agencies for staff, for rent, utilities, information technology, legal services, things like that. In essence, it's the growth in the cost of doing business. This would be what the agency has identified as the amount needed to maintain the current level of service. So I won't go into that level of depth every time we see it, but we're going to see it quite often. For the state auditor, that's been identified as $1,252,000. The state auditor has also requested a couple of new FTEs for various items. The first one is the school finance accountability team. This would be a team of 6 FTEs who are focusing on audits related to local school districts. In this case, the amount is about 1.5 million. Eventually,
Mr. Erickson, if I can just interrupt, somebody
yes,
has
please.
an open mic and it's noisy. Okay.
Sounds better, maybe? Thank you,
Yeah.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Seems to be. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So continuing on, this school finance accountability team would eventually become not self-financing, but they do charge fees to conduct audits to locals. But the proposal is to initially not have to charge those fees, which would incur about a $1.5 million general fund hit. There's also a change item to add both a township specialist and a special investigator. The first would do outreach efforts with townships to try and prevent problems from developing at the township level that are later revealed in more problematic audits. And the special investigator would do sort of a triage effort on concerns that are brought to the office and doing some of the preliminary work on those cases. At the Attorney General's office, they have requested $4.95 million for litigation technology resources. There's various IT components that they are looking to add in maintaining their, not just maintaining their level of service, but expanding their IT capabilities. The maintain and stabilize experienced attorney staff, a $600,000 biennial request approximates their operating adjustment. There are two new initiatives here below. Enhanced antitrust resources would be a team of 3 FTEs who deal with antitrust litigation and cases. And the criminal enforcement and initiatives would be an initiative to assist with county prosecutions of certain types of crimes. You'll see here that those teams were, sorry, I think I left off the FTE portion there. The enforcement and initiatives would be 11 FTEs. So you'll see over here, approximately 1.156 million for the first team and 3.6 million for the second team. The Secretary of State has a one-time request of $500,000 to relocate their business services and IT offices. There's also an operating adjustment to the Safe at Home program, which amounts to $220,000 for the biennium. They've also requested $100,000 each year ongoing for one FTE to do civic engagement and youth outreach related to youth voter engagement. We'll now begin a sort of a series of these operating adjustments. Like I said, I won't go in depth. The Campaign Finance Board is looking for $66,000 on the biennium. The CAP Board, $49,000. The Office of Administrative Hearings, $14,000. Here we have minute services. They have requested $4.15 million in the current biennium to implement the recommendations of the Governor's Blue Ribbon Council on Information Technology. I'll call out the tails for this one just because unusually for some initiatives, the request actually decreases in the tails. They also have requested an operating adjustment. What I will note is this is the first of 4 of these negative operating adjustments in the current year. Back in October, the Commissioner of MMB asked certain agencies to reduce or to hold back a certain amount of their appropriations and impounded that amount. The governor has elected to cancel those holdbacks at this point to create savings on the bottom line to enable the recommendations of the current biennium or the budget biennium. At administration, we see a similar operating adjustment in the current budget period and also a cancellation of the holdback in the current fiscal year 21. There's also an increase to the in lieu of rent, which is sort of an operating adjustment for those spaces that are occupied by entities that don't pay rent. This would include the legislature, certain veterans organizations, and things like that. They have also requested $5 million one-time in enterprise planning, space consolidation, and relocation, which is essentially for a strategic plan to look at uses of space on the Capitol complex and at agencies. What kind of space needs does the enterprise face, especially in light of how working is being conducted during the pandemic. MMB is requesting an operating adjustment. You will also see here the other half of the change item I mentioned earlier, the single audit responsibilities moving from the legislative auditor to Minnesota Management and Budget. It's being structured as an open appropriation, and the $2.5 million here balances what was taken from the legislature's budget. They've also offered as a change item Payment Plus, which would be a program that allows vendors to request rebates for their contracts that would come a little bit quicker than the current methods. The MMB would withhold a small charge on those payments, which would fund the program. We'll see below that the remainder that's not needed for administrative expenses would be deposited in the federal fund or in the general fund, excuse me. Then we'll see again a series of operating adjustments. At the Department of Revenue, that number is about 10.8 million. At the Amateur Sports Commission, it's 16,000 for the biennium. The Minnesotans of African Heritage Council is 32,000. Latino Affairs, 28,000. The Asian Pacific Council is 29,000. The Indian Affairs Council, 27,000. The Historical Society, 1.1 million. And the Arts Board, 30,000. Here you'll see in fiscal 21 that there is a cancellation. This is what's left over from 2 years ago when there was a one-time appropriation of $700,000 to help the Arts Board move its location. The amount that's left over has been proposed for cancellation. Then more operating adjustments for the Board of Accountancy, $36,000. The Board of Architectural and Engineering, and other portions of that board's name, 35,000. The Barber Examiner Board, 15,000. Cosmetology, 139,000. And then finally at the bottom, there is a non-general fund request at the Gambling Control Board. This would be an increase, I believe it's 13 FTEs. It would be an expansion of operations in response to the growth of charitable gambling and the need to regulate that industry. This is out of the Special Revenue Fund and specifically out of an account that is funded by dedicated receipts from these organizations that are being regulated. So it's about $2.8 million. It is not a hit to the general fund, but to that specific account. You'll see here some rolled up totals, but there are some further adjustments as we move down into revenues and transfers. You'll see that there is a request at admin to make up for a shortfall in the parking internal service fund. There's supposed to be a transfer from that fund into the general fund, and they are asking that the transfer be suspended for a couple of years to alleviate pressure on that fund. You'll see here another portion of that payment plus proposal. This is the portion that MMB is spending. And then Minute has proposed to cancel certain funds in the ITA account, sometimes called the Odyssey Fund, for projects that have been completed and for which there is a balance outstanding sitting in that fund. So you see here 179,000 for the general fund portion. If you skip down here to lines 152 and 153, you'll see that there are also some funds that would be canceled to the Workers' Compensation Fund and the State Government Special Revenue Fund for health-related boards. You'll see here is the transfer for the administrative expenses of Payment Plus, and I'm seeing. Oh, excuse me. This is the one I mentioned before. This is the payment for MMB, and above is the revenue, the deposit into the general fund of the excess fees that are not needed for administration. And Mr. Chair, that brings me to the end of that presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I do see that there are several commissioners here who might be better positioned to answer some of those questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Erickson. And I think that I'm sorry, I went into chair mode.
No problem.
Chair Howe.
Go ahead.
Well, Mr. Chair, I really appreciate what Mr. Erickson has shared here today, but I do think that there will be questions, but I think it might be helpful to have the four entities, the agencies that are here today to go and then go to questions, but I'm fine as to what your wish is, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. And if Commissioner Robert Davis is here from the Department of Administration, you're first on the list. If you're prepared to go.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely. So if you could just state your name and then proceed with the testimony, please.
Happy to do that. For the record, I'm Alice Roberts Davis. I'm Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Administration. I appreciate the opportunity to highlight Governor Walz's recommendation for the department in the COVID-19 recovery budget. I know that your time this morning is limited, so I will be brief. The team members at the Department of Administration bring a wide range of expertise in core administrative services that have been essential in the state's pandemic response. I'm really proud of the willingness of so many of our employees who willingly redeployed or took on extra work to protect Minnesotans and our facilities throughout the pandemic. The pandemic response has highlighted the importance of these services, but I cannot emphasize enough that the services delivered by the department are always essential to the running of state government. Governor Walz's recommendation for the department are focused on meeting our partners' expectations for our critical services efficiently and as cost effectively as possible. First, the governor recommends increasing in lieu of rent funding by $624,000. In lieu of rent, or ILR, covers costs associated with operations around the Capitol complex for entities that do not directly pay for their leased spaces. This includes Senate, House, and ceremonial spaces in the Capitol, as well as space for veteran service organizations, monuments and memorials, the reviser of statutes, and the legislative reference library. ILR helps ensure maintenance levels to properly maintain the restored Capitol, as well as the governor's residence. In lieu of rent, levels are based on approved lease rates and are in line with the rate charges at other admin operated facilities. The recommendation is based on the approved FY 22-23 lease rates, and ILR is the only available source of funding for maintenance and operation of these spaces. Next, the governor recommends several adjustments to admin's operating budget. In FY 2021, Governor Walz recommends a reduction of $300,000. This amount reflects the savings generated by delaying filling positions and holding other positions vacant. Over the past year, we have redistributed duties where possible and focused on highest priority work. However, this is not a strategy that will allow us to meet our partners' expectations in the long term. In fiscal years 2022 and 23, the governor recommends a modest 1.8% increase to the department's operating budget to maintain current service levels by funding compensation for the existing workforce and other expenses such as rent and IT. This increase is below the assumed level of inflation, acknowledging continued efficiencies achieved by admin. There's also a one-time ask for space relocation in the enterprise planning, space consolidation, and relocation ask. This is for $1.5 million for a strategic plan. The last time the agency conducted a statutorily required strategic plan was in 1993, and that was updated in 1995. We believe that it's essential that we have a strategic plan for the state so that we can better understand how we should locate state buildings and co-locate agencies, especially as workers are returning from the pandemic. It will give us a holistic view of where we can locate and consolidate agency workers. And so we're asking for $5 million on a one-time ask for that expenditure. Finally, the governor recommends a budget neutral policy to enhance state grant administration with no new funds proposed. The initiative allows state agencies to retain for grant administration up to 5% of grant funds for newly legislatively named grants and up to 10% for new competitively awarded grants. This change would ensure that all new grants have the minimal funds available to provide an appropriate level of service for grantees and protect the state investment in the grant by ensuring compliance with the state law and policies. That concludes my brief description of the governor's recommendations. I appreciate your consideration, and I look forward to working with you to ensure admin's continued delivery of effective and efficient services, and I'll stand for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. Excellent. Is there any questions? Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Davis, just so I understand, the Department of Administration is responsible for maintenance upkeep of facilities within the capital complex, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. One additional question to Ms. Davis. Within the last 12 months, we had criminal damage to private or to public property in the Capitol Mall area. Specifically, a statue was torn down. The culprit and culprits that were responsible for this are not being financially held responsible. In the budget that the governor has proposed, is there financing being prepared or being included to restore the statue that is government property and to put it back in its rightful place?
Ms. Roberts Davis.
Mr. Chair, Senator, I believe that everything associated with the statue that was removed is still under review by the ACCS, which is the Advisory Committee on Capital Area Security. There have been no decisions about what will happen with the statue. I believe there's about $150,000 worth of damage to that statue, and until there is a decision made by DPS, admin, and the ACCS, nothing will move forward with that statue as far as I'm aware.
No further questions, Senator Osmink. Is there any other questions from members for Ms. Roberts Davis on admin? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Roberts Davis. Thank you for that presentation. And we'll go to Deputy Commissioner Church from MMB. Please state your name, sir, and for the record, and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Ryan Church, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Minnesota Management and Budget. We're running a little thin this morning, so Commissioner Showalter sends his regards, but we appreciate the opportunity just to present MMB's priorities contained in the governor's budget. And we've got some slides here to hopefully focus our attention here. The four key things within the bill include the agency operating adjustment, the establishment of the Payment Plus program, changes relating to the state's single audit, and then streamlining payments for public defender costs. And if I might, Mr. Chair, I'll just give a few sentences to each of those items and then take any questions.
Sounds good. Go
Thank
ahead.
you, Mr. Chair. So first item, the agency operating adjustment. I believe everybody here understands that those operating budgets are basically what enables the executive branch to provide services to Minnesotans in accordance with the laws passed by the legislature. And it really has been impressive in this last year to see how important it has been to have state employees respond to the pandemic in communities across the state. And at the same time, doing everything possible to maintain the array of other state services that Minnesotans have come to expect. Just getting into the numbers very quickly, as you saw in the tracking sheet, in fiscal year 2021, MMB took a 5% reduction, which is represented by the 1.367 million reduction here and in the rider language of the bill. As we move into the next biennium, MMB is seeking an operating adjustment that would add $598,000 in fiscal year 2022 and a little over $1 million each year after that. These resources are important for a lot of reasons, but just in the way of a few brief examples that I think align with kind of the main priorities of MMB's duties. First of all, is to maintain a continuity of state operations in emergencies like COVID-19. And really, it's MMB's role to work across the enterprise to manage those operations and provide timely and accurate information about the emergencies to legislators, the press, the public, state agencies, and their employees. Another key thing that these resources help continue to provide are the basic legislators and state agencies that are useful in budget and financial analysis. You can think about budget documents, forecasts, including evidence-based research that our results team is using to help legislators and agencies focus resources so that they have the greatest possible benefit to Minnesotans. And of course, we will continue to monitor state agencies' compliance with human resource laws and other policies. I would point out that the proposed operating adjustment is also below the assumed level of inflation, recognizing that MMB must continue to find operating efficiencies. And MMB is committed to doing that, even when those efficiencies don't financially accrue to the agency's operational budget. And the next proposal is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. The Payment Plus program is a rebate program through US Bank that allows state vendors to receive payments by a virtual credit card rather than a check. By utilizing this program, the state will receive a percentage of the vendor payment in a form of a rebate from our bank, which will be credited to the general fund. It's a great win-win for both the state and our vendors, as our vendors will receive faster payment and we can utilize a program that gives the state some money back. By implementing the Payment Plus program, there's an anticipated general fund revenue of approximately $336,000 in fiscal year 22 and $671,000 each year thereafter. Next, I'll just highlight the changes to the state's single audit, which Mr. Erickson highlighted for you in the tracking sheet. The proposal is for a open appropriation to MMB for the costs necessary to contract with an auditor to conduct the annual single audit. If Minnesota does not complete the single audit as required under federal law, the state is at risk of losing nearly $20 billion in federal funding each year. It's important to point out, as Mr. Erickson did, that the funding to conduct the single audit is currently part of the OLA's base appropriation, since the OLA has been conducting the single audit for about 35 years. However, earlier this year, the OLA notified the Legislative Audit Commission and MMB that the OLA will no longer be performing the audit. Accordingly, the proposal includes a reduction to the OLA's budget by an amount equivalent to the estimated cost of the single audit, so that the net effect of the proposal is to transfer that funding to MMB so that it can contract with a qualified vendor to conduct the audit. Based on a 4-year average of the actual costs incurred by the OLA to complete the single audit, the proposal assumes the cost of the auditor will be approximately $1.244 million annually. And then lastly, MMB's final priority seeks to streamline payments for public defender costs. You may know that certain public defender expenses are paid using a portion of the county program aid appropriation. Under current law, the Department of Revenue transfers $500,000 from the county program aid appropriation to MMB every July, and then MMB makes approved payments on behalf of the public, on behalf of the Board of Public Defense. So currently, MMB's role is really that of a treasurer. It's the Board of Public Defense that reviews and approves these public defender expenses. MMB simply pays them. Under this proposal, the Department of Revenue will transfer the funds to the board directly rather than MMB, streamlining the process. The proposal also ensures that the entity approving these public defender expenses, which is the board, is the same entity that is processing the payments. And I should note that this proposal is supported by the Board of Public Defense. That is the extent of the 4 items, Mr. Chair, that I would highlight in MMB in this bill. And we, again, appreciate the opportunity to present that. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Church. And I'll go to Senator Koran with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Deputy Commissioner. I had a question around the OLA, the single audit. So the 1.24 is the average. Where is the reflective reimbursement? So the federal government reimburses and actually pays state governments to produce or to perform the single audit. Where are those revenues going to be reflected in this particular budget?
Commissioner,
you're asking for additional revenues, and so is that above and beyond what the federal government pays us to perform that audit?
Commissioner Church.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Koran, I think the way to explain this is that there's an appropriation made by the legislature. In the past, the OLA has used that appropriation to conduct the audit. In this case, MMB would use that appropriation to hire an auditor, contract an auditor to perform the audit. And then the year following, MMB bills the agencies for those costs and then reimburses the general fund. So that's how that works.
Senator Koran.
So the agencies, Mr. Chair, so and Deputy Commissioner, so the agencies receive that funding directly to for the reimbursement from the federal government?
Deputy Commissioner.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Senator Koran. The agencies are spending federal dollars through the programs funded by the federal government, and it would be out of those funds that they would be reimbursing the state.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Senator Koran, one more follow-up here.
Okay, thank you. There isn't a specifically delineated fee or funding stream provided to those agencies to perform that audit, or so you tell me it's baked into their overall general funding across the board?
Okay. Deputy Commissioner.
Yes, Mr. Chair and Senator Koran, that's my understanding. I do believe we have our Assistant Commissioner for Statewide Accounting, and perhaps she can add to this if you don't mind.
Whoever that may be, state your name for the record and answer the question, please.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, my name is Cindy Farrell, and I'm the Assistant Commissioner for the Accounting Services Division at MMB. The current cost of the OLA related to the single audit is allocated to state agencies based on the hours that the OLA spends auditing those agencies' federal programs. And that allocation is then billed back to those agencies through what's called the statewide indirect cost plan, which is prepared annually and approved by the federal government. However, in the current process, there's a 2 fiscal year delay in when the agencies actually pay back the general fund for those costs. For example, OLA's audit services performed in fiscal year 20 are put into the cost allocation plan that's prepared and submitted to the federal government in fiscal 21. And then that becomes effective for the billings that are sent to state agencies during fiscal year 22. And it's not currently a dollar for dollar recovery. Some funds and specific programs are exempt from paying statewide indirect costs. So we don't necessarily recover the full amount that's allocated out to agencies, but it is a good percentage of it. So the proposal, under the current proposal, the amounts that are included in our cost estimate are based on a 4-year average. And that's detailed in our change item page. But the cost does vary from year to year, depending on what the federal government will require for that year. Therefore, the proposal is that MMB is requesting an open appropriation to pay the actual cost of the audit each year, which will then be allocated and billed to those agencies that are audited in the subsequent fiscal year. And those agencies would be charging those costs to the federal programs that are being audited.
Thank you.
So in a sense, the program would speed up the recovery of those funds by 1 year.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Farrell. And with that, we'll go to Senator Clausen for a.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a point of personal privilege, I'd like to say hello to Mr. Church, who was a former student of mine at one time, and also to acknowledge a little known fact that Ryan was the state pole vault champion at one time in his youth. And it's great to see you, Ryan. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for that. And with that, we'll go to Deputy Commissioner from the Department of Revenue.
Mr. Chairman, Chair Kiffmeyer, members of the committee, thank you for having me here today. For the record, my name is Lee Ho, Deputy Commissioner at the Minnesota Department of Revenue. I'm here today to give you a brief overview of the department's budget request. The Department of Revenue currently has about 1,400 employees that work throughout the state of Minnesota. About 93% of our $170 million budget is comprised of employee and information technology costs. The department uses this funding to collect $27 billion in tax revenue annually for the state, as well as about $450 million in local option sales taxes. Each year, the department processes 3 million individual income tax returns and sends over 2 million individual income tax refunds to Minnesotans. The department also issues over 900,000 property tax refunds to Minnesotans each year. The IRS in Minnesota opened the 2021 individual income tax filing season a little over 2 weeks ago on February 12th. As of Monday, the department had received about 800,000 individual income tax returns, processed nearly 600,000 returns, and sent about 400,000 refunds. The governor's recommendations that I'm presenting today reflect the funding necessary to sustain our current operations and our agency commitment to identifying efficiencies to manage ongoing cost growth related to compensation, IT services, and other agency operating expenses. The governor recommends a one-time reduction of $8.274 million to the FY 2021 general fund operating appropriation due to efficiencies we realized during the last fiscal year. That reduction reflects the savings generated from efficiencies related to our pandemic response. This included adhering to the state hiring freeze, maximizing virtual customer interactions, which reduced fleet vehicle and other travel expenses, and salary savings due to leave or redeployments, allowing us to maximize one-time compensation savings. In order to maintain the current level of service delivery at the Department of Revenue in the next biennium, the department requests additional funding of $3.956 million in FY22 and $6.8 $1.28 million in FY23. This operating adjustment partially covers known employee compensation growth and allows the department to maintain its existing level of information technology services. One of the agency's strategies includes promoting operational efficiencies, and in the next biennium, the department will begin to establish a permanent virtual workforce model by transitioning some of our current regional office locations to a virtual home-based work environment. This will allow the department to maintain a presence throughout the state and expand our ability to recruit employees located anywhere in Minnesota while reducing costs for renting physical office locations. In addition, our statutory obligation to mail paper documents to our customers creates significant budget pressure for the department, and we will be working to identify and realize ways to reduce our printing and mailing costs and send documents to customers electronically. This funding request is necessary to sustain our current operations because of increased customer demand, the significant work related to the difference between federal and state law, and the need to protect the revenue stream for the state. If there are changes to Minnesota's tax code made during the legislative session, we will need to request additional administrative funding to ensure the department is able to update the tax forms, our internal systems, and to prepare taxpayers for new or significant changes to the tax code. The department works year-round to provide a variety of services to customers around the state. The department works to provide outreach and support for tax filers who are eligible for free file options to ensure they are aware of these options and can access them online. One service area I would like to highlight today is our volunteer income tax assistance, or VITA sites. VITA is a service for taxpayers who are 60 or older, have a disability, speak limited or no English, or have an annual income of less than $55,000. The COVID-19 pandemic brought unique challenges to our VITA sites. While many free tax return preparation sites in Minnesota suspended or limited their services last year due to the pandemic, we shifted our in-person sites to virtual interactions so we could continue to serve low-income Minnesotans in a safe environment. A list of in-person and virtual VITA sites is available on our website. The governor recommends expanding the list of organizations eligible to receive grants to provide taxpayer assistance. The expansion would align the eligible organizations with the types of grantees under the federal VITA program. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for letting me present to you today, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ho. Deputy Commissioner, I don't see any questions at this time. Thank you for that presentation. It was very well. And with that, we'll go to Commissioner. Well, I will tell folks that we are gonna probably go late. We're gonna finish this agenda. So, but we'll go to Commissioner Thomas and Deputy Commissioner Aitken from the, well, I'm not sure where you're from. So if you're on, please state your name, whoever's gonna go first, and go ahead with your testimony. And please remember, we're trying to keep to that 5-minute. Last testifier did an excellent job. So,
thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Tarek Tomes. I'm the Commissioner of Minnesota IT Services and the Chief Information Officer for the state of Minnesota. And we really appreciate the opportunity, and we'll absolutely do everything that we can to stick to the 5 minutes. At Minnesota IT Services, our mission is to provide and support for the most digital, innovative government services that work for everyone. And during the last 12 months, certainly during this pandemic, our support for enabling a remote workforce of executive branch workers, continuing to support the evolving needs of state services during the pandemic, and also providing innovative and technology support for changing the trajectory and finding opportunities related to combating COVID-19 directly has been incredibly important. And we're really incredibly proud of the work of our Minnesota IT Services team. Next slide, Brandon, please. We're going to present a few change items, and I'm going to tag team this together with Deputy Commissioner John Eichten. Change item 1 really is related to Governor Walz's support for a Blue Ribbon Council on recommendation related to transforming our project delivery capability to really maximize business value. We have been incredibly fortunate to work in collaboration and benefit from the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Council, and certainly appreciative to Senator Koran and the work that Chair Rick King has done. This particular change item is related to the role that we play in supporting IT modernization and the Blue Ribbon Council's recommendation for expanding that role as a leader and to make sure that there is broad coordination of IT governance in collaboration with state agencies. It's really important to highlight, maybe in specific, just the role related to agile development and project methodologies, and just making sure that there is consistency and strong approaches to the large portfolio of projects that the state endeavors on a continual basis. A shift to a project management framework to a product management framework from a project management framework, a really important recommendation from the Blue Ribbon Council. Recognizing the important collaboration and role that organizational change management, not just from a technology perspective, plays in the successful delivery of these initiatives, and creating critical space for process modernization and workforce modernization as a part of this. And we have certainly discussed previously with members of this committee just the critical clarification that is needed for the various roles that technology and business side play in these initiatives. The Blue Ribbon Council recommendations related to this particular change item really fall into three broad categories. One is related to modernization and laying a framework for how government can approach modernization, including modernization principles, a modernization review board, and providing a broad playbook that the executive branch can use. The business process modernization and organizational change management, that is really critical as a part of this. And then also supporting the critical role that security and risk assessments that are done as a part of project delivery play. I'd like to really highlight and call out a couple of the recommendations, and there are probably 10 or 11 recommendations from the Blue Ribbon Council that this particular change item encompasses. One is just simplifying business processes and rules, and we've certainly seen that in the last 12 months as it relates to any of these modernization activities, that view of can business processes or rules be simplified to support the most effective delivery of services. And then also the engagement of other governmental units and other stakeholders that may be impacted by these projects and initiatives. Next slide. So the Governor Walz's recommendation in support of the Blue Ribbon Council recommendation is a request for $4.15 million for the biennium to really align state business and IT modernization practices in conjunction with the recommendations from the Blue Ribbon Council. In specific, it would include professional and technical contract engagement with industry experts as it relates to agile implementation framework, acquisition of a portfolio management tool to support the large number of projects that the executive branch manages, training resources to support this agile transformation that is not just within the technology realm or not just within IT resources, but certainly also from business resources, and the establishment of an Office of Transformation and Strategy Delivery to make sure that the initiatives that we endeavor on produce the highest valuable possible and a return on investment as quickly as possible. Next slide. Just as a recap to set a little bit of a to give a little bit of scope to what we're talking about, there are currently 317 active projects in the project portfolio. And in 2020, just a few projects to highlight that were delivered: MnDrive, Campus, 511 upgrades, pandemic support for unemployment insurance, as well as emergency food benefits, upgrades to SWIFT. The portfolio of projects within this 317 active projects is quite large, and this entire recommendation is centered around improving the value of what is delivered and raising the success and transparency related to that delivery. Next slide. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Eichten to walk through the remaining 3 change items.
Well, Commissioner Tomes, we need to really wrap it up. So if we can I hate to say it, but we're going to have to speed through these 3 if we want to get through them. So, because we're at 6 minutes now. So,
Mr. Chair, happy to do that if you'd like me to proceed.
Yes, go ahead.
Quickly. Absolutely. For the record, my name's John Eichten. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Minnesota IT Services. This next change item, similar to other agencies, an operating adjustment, does reflect a reduction in the current fiscal year of $379,000. I believe you've heard explanation there around the hiring freeze and other reduced expenses attributable to the pandemic. FY22, 76,000, and FY23, 153,000. This is about a 1.5% increase. And again, similar employee compensation costs, rent, other increases, inflationary increases in operating expenses. If we could go to the next slide, this would be the cash flow assistance change item. This is no fiscal impact to this change item. It's maintaining current practice from previous biennial budget bills, just addresses the cash flow issue between when Minute renders services and is repaid for those services by agencies, roughly 30 to 90 day time period. Again, no fiscal impact. The last one here is the ITA account fund cancellation, which Mr. Erickson walked through quite comprehensively earlier. So you can see the amounts there on the right, 179,000 to the general fund and smaller amounts for the other funds. Again, this is attributable to the 4-year time period that agencies have to expend funds through the Odyssey account, ITA account, and remaining balances from projects that have been completed before the 4-year time period where there was just a small remaining balance. That should conclude. We are happy to answer any questions. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Deputy Commissioner Eichen, that was commendable. You breezed through those very, very quickly. I appreciate it. And with that, I don't see any questions, and this bill will be laid over for possible inclusion into the on this bill. And so Senator Kiffmeyer, Senate File 1422 is your next bill, and I see you have the A3 amendment. Is that correct, Senator Kiffmeyer?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I move Senate File 1422, and I also move the A3 amendment to Senate File 1422. Mr. Chair, this amendment has been posted and it was sent out to members as well. I think it was about 15 minutes ago or so.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. And with that, members to the A3 amendment, all those in favor say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay, and give me a thumbs down. With that, Senator Kiffmeyer, the A3 amendment is adopted. To your bill, Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senate File 1422, as amended, has to do with challenged voters process modification and notification. So in regards to challenged voters, this in particular is for those who are have a challenge due to felon status or a challenge due to their right to vote being removed because of mental incapacity. In particular, these might be people who are under guardianship or a variety of areas like that, whatever it is. There would be a court-ordered situation where they would be determined by a court to be unable to participate in the voting process. So, Mr. Chair, I would just have Ms. Stengel, if she could, just walk through the bill for the members.
Ms. Stengel.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I know we're short on time, so I will try to keep it brief, but can answer any questions or provide additional detail if that's helpful to members. So Section 1 of the bill has to do with a person that is registering on election day. Before a person is allowed to register on election day, the election judge has to determine if that person is on a list of challenged voters that is in the precinct, and that list is established later in the bill. If a person is on that list, they are allowed to register to vote, but must cast a challenged ballot instead of a regular ballot. And a challenged ballot is very similar to a provisional ballot, and I'll talk about the details on that in just a minute. Section 2 amends the public voter information list and requires that that list will also include a history of challenge statuses for each person, as well as people that have been removed or made inactive in the statewide voter registration system. Section 3 is where the precinct challenged voter list is established. Within the week before an election, the Secretary of State has to prepare and transmit to county auditors lists for each precinct that includes each person that is challenged in the statewide voter registration system. Section 4 has to do with when a person is challenged in the statewide voter registration system, the county auditor or municipal clerk that makes that change must notify that person of the change in status. Section 5 establishes a way for a person to contest their challenge. And basically what this does is set up a system for the individual to contact the entity that is the basis of the challenge. And what I mean by that is there are certain entities in current law, including the state courts, Department of Corrections, and the Department of Public Safety, that have to provide regular reports to the Secretary of State on things like felony convictions and those sorts of things. And those are the basis of challenging someone in the statewide voter registration system. And those reports are current law and not changed here. So when somebody is challenged on a basis of one of those reports, they are notified as in Section 4 and then can contest that challenge as it provided in Section 5. And they do that by contacting the entity that provided the basis of the challenge. And then that entity has to review the challenge to see whether it was accurate or not. There is an opportunity for the person to also request a meeting with that entity to talk about this. So if the entity determines the challenge was correct, they notify the individual and no change in status is made. If the entity finds that the challenge was, the information was incorrect, they notify the Secretary of State and the challenge is removed from the statewide voter registration system. Section 6 goes back to the polling place. On election day, before a voter is allowed to sign a polling place roster or voter signature certificate, the election judge must confirm their name, address, and date of birth, and that's a change from the permissive language in current law. If a voter's registration is challenged on the roster, they have to cast a provisional challenged ballot unless that challenge is first resolved as provided later in the bill. Section 7 strikes some language relating to challenges and moves that into Section 8. So Section 8 talks about challenges for residency and how you resolve those challenges related to residency. Under this provision, similar to current law, the election judge questions the individual about where they live to determine if they live within the precinct. If they do, they're allowed to vote. If they don't, they're not allowed to vote. This process is allowed to be used on election day only for residency challenges, none of the other types of challenges. Section 9 sets up the provisions for challenged ballots and talks about casting a challenge ballot. It's very similar to a provisional ballot where you would fill out an envelope including your identifying information. Then you would fill out your ballot, put it in a secrecy envelope, and put it into the challenged ballot envelope. All of the challenged envelopes then are kept separately from all of the other ballots. After election day, but before the canvassing board meets, the county auditor or municipal clerk then go through and reject each accept or reject the envelopes. And they do this by reviewing information in the statewide voter registration system to ensure or to check whether the challenge was accurate for election day. If they found that the voter was not or should not have been challenged on election day, the ballot is accepted. If the challenge was appropriate and shows up in the system as being legitimate, then the ballot is rejected. The voter is not required to appear before the city or county in order to have the ballot accepted or rejected. There are provisions for reconciliation, so ensuring that the numbers of signatures and ballots match, and if not, there are provisions to correct that. And then finally, all accepted challenged ballots envelopes are opened and deposited in the ballot box. Section 10 makes a few changes into the existing penalties, making it a felony to misrepresent a person's identity in asking for a challenged ballot or asking the ballot to be counted, or challenging a voter's eligibility to vote knowing that the challenge is not meritorious. And generally, this is effective January 1st, 2022, except for some of the provisions related to the voter registration list, and some of the data provisions are effective this summer.
Thank you, Ms. Stengel. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chair, and I appreciate Ms. Stengel walking through these parts of the bill. I would like to mention in regards to the A3 amendment, there were just some technical things on lines 1.2 to 1.7. However, what I have added to Senate File 1422 is funding. So we currently have federal fund appropriation from the Help America Vote Act that is currently there. But we are going to use a portion of that for grants for the purpose of making grants to political subdivisions for the purpose of implementing challenged ballots. So there is a funding mechanism here to take care of the costs in regards to local units of government, which is allowed under the federal funds criteria, is an allowable expense to use for that money. And members, to let you know that we are one of 3 states that do not use provisional ballots. 1 of 3. 47 other states do use provisional ballots. Now, other states have different requirements in regards to their registration of voters. Some of them are same-day voter registration states. The majority of them are not. But nevertheless, 47 states use provisional ballots. And if you've noticed, even in this last election, provisional ballots were resolved and did not cause undue delay in responding to the election as part of that process. But I thought it was important to know funding is included in this bill for those additional costs other than the regular expenses. And just to remind you also that when challenged voters come to the polling place or in an absentee balloting situation, there is paperwork, there is process in regards to doing that. And I'd like to just mention a little story in regards to what happened to me this year. I have a sister that I'm a guardian for, and we haven't gone through the paperwork to have her voting rights removed. She is a very happy 2.5-year-old mentally. She knows one day of the week. She knows only the number 2. And so she is very limited in her capacity. But a resident of a group home, the staff there noticed she did not have a court order, though she did when guardianship was established. With that guardianship, it was stated that she does not have the right to vote. However, they wanted to know if we as guardians would take her or if the staff would take her. Now, I want to remind you, this is a clearly, absolutely is in a situation, does not have the mental capacity to vote. And so this is very concerning, and with a challenged ballot process, remember, these are coming from the courts. This information is coming from the courts, and they are establishing both whether it's a felony or a guardianship. And in that situation, if they have a challenged status, the way it works today, a question is asked and they can self-certify and say, no, I am mentally competent to overcome a court challenge, which was established through the court system. So whether it's a felony or guardianship, in particular, just to recognize there is paperwork, there is effort in the polling place and other ways to deal with people who have a challenge status today. But the increase here in provisional ballots is is providing an envelope, secrecy envelope, and an outer envelope for processing for later, and those costs through grants from the Secretary of State and that funding of federal money are included here. What I also did was the funds are for the first 2 years, and it also is able to be carried over for the next 2 years so that we can have kind of a 4-year run of that prior to that. And I would say, members, what's important here is that people will have an opportunity to cast a ballot, maybe a provisional ballot, but once the staff have ascertained the accuracy of the data, that ballot would be counted, would be cast. And so we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to cast a ballot that is legally entitled to cast that ballot. Members, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. And I see Senator Fateh has a question.
Yeah,
Senator Fateh.
thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer, as well. In yesterday's hearing, Senator Newman pointed out how onerous the prospect of going to a court of appeals is, and that folks contesting rulemaking would be discouraged by having to go to a court of appeals without having any relief being granted administratively. And you concurred. So I guess my question would be, why is expecting a business to go to a court of appeals to contest an administrative ruling unreasonable, but expecting an individual voter to appeal their right to vote in the district court not? Thank you.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Well, first of all, there is no fee, a big difference right there. There is no fee, there is no hiring of an attorney. They are able to make use of that. But if you realize that, first of all, this information comes from a court, I expect that these appeals would be very minimal, and that is because this staff time that is used in the staff offices already themselves going back to the court, or is going back in any case to check and verify. And so we are being extra cautious at giving them an additional opportunity. But remember, without the voter coming in whatsoever, the staff within the county auditor office, usually county auditor, the elections office of the county, would be reviewing this data and be making a determination based upon court data, not their opinion, not from anybody else, but directly from the courts themselves who have originally given this information. We just want to give an opportunity, maybe in the last few days before Election Day, something might have changed, and we want to give every opportunity. But the appeal system that we have put in here would be very minimal as far as the using of it. But again, we just wanted to give another opportunity for the voter to do so. But again, most of that work is already done through that, but there is no fee in regards to that.
Senator Fateh, a follow-up question on the process, or?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. With that, Senator Carlson, question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Kiffmeyer, what we have seen estimates of up to 30% of provisional ballots, depending on the system, to clear them, that they are never cleared and that people are disenfranchised from voting. What would you estimate the number of people that are disenfranchised here who are actually eligible to vote and should be able to vote, but for one reason or another are not able to clear their name from this challenged list? And I think I also know that, and perhaps you do too, that the challenge list has lots of errors in it. And so there are errors that need to be cleared up. And I don't know how deeply the people who are trying to clear these will go into, for instance, a criminal record to find out just why that person is on that challenge list. How many people like that do you think are going to be disenfranchised?
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Carlson, let's realize you're using numbers from another state. And so being responsible for numbers that come from another state is not within the purview of what we are doing here. And so they are responsible for that. But in regards to this, remember that first of all, this data comes from the court. So what you're really saying is the court is inaccurate, because this is something that the Secretary of State's office takes from the court and puts it into the state voter registration system. So you're basically saying either the Secretary of State or the court has done something wrong. I don't happen to think so. This is a data file that comes in and it is put into the state voter registration system. The only thing might be a matter of timing, that in the few days before the election day, there might be an update to that data. So we want to be sure that we capture that opportunity for someone by going through having the staff again, not the voter, but the staff would have that responsibility and that opportunity to check again with the court. Remember, they check with the court. So this is not from some uncredible source. This is from a very credible source, from our own Minnesota courts. And to date, I have not known of those errors. But again, the opportunity here is in casting a provisional ballot to give every voter the best opportunity to cast their legally entitled ballot. But also the secondary opportunity is for the staff to check with the court record. So none of the staff, it would be, I think, probably privacy issues would come in here. What they do is go and check the court record.
Senator Carlson, follow up or?
Yes, well, okay, let's go to Minnesota numbers here. In Dakota County, where I live, in 2018, there were 17 people that were referred for prosecution. Of that 17, 13 were deemed no charges. There was no charges filed whatsoever. And what I did find out is that the court also puts, flags the people that have a felony charge against them before they appear in court. So there is no decision by the court that they are actually a felon. And that's one of the reasons why these people are now allowed to vote after that felony charge has either been adjudicated or pled down or something else. So we had 13 of those that had no charges. And then I looked at the other 4, 2 were legitimate. 2 of them were legitimate charges. One voted twice, and actually he was a Republican. But the other one was a non-citizen who voted, and that has still not been cleared. Those are both under investigation yet. But the other 2 had their voter rights restored by the court, and it's in their criminal record just before Election Day. So there are errors, and there are errors of very recent information. And so those people would be disenfranchised by this, this process. And otherwise, they could have recertified themselves right at the polls, and they could have voted, and nobody has to pay for any extra follow-up, and there isn't a delay, there's no uncertainty, and there's no disenfranchisement. And this was for the 17 people that were referred in Dakota County. Other counties have fewer than that. And by the way, I need to say in 2020, the referral in Dakota County was 0, none. None were referred for investigation or prosecution. So anybody that was on that challenge list and had to fill out a challenged ballot, a provisional ballot, whatever you want to call it, would have been disenfranchised unless they were able to go and clear it. So that their vote would not be counted on Election Day.
Senator Kiffmeyer, final comments before we vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so just to realize, members, this data comes from the court. The court is a court issue. This is not a matter of an issue here, but it is certainly something that I think the court should be informed of. The purpose here is that the expectation from the court is that these would be convicted felons, and I'll communicate that with the court to make sure. But nonetheless, members, it is not just challenge voters here in regards to felons, but it's also in regards to guardianship, and especially when it comes to guardianship. These are people who are, because they don't have the mental competency, that they have been adjudicated by a court. And so we need to protect vulnerable people amongst us from coercion or from manipulation, and to make sure that we have accuracy in that regard. Well, Mr. Chair and members, thank you very much for the time in hearing this very important bill today. And absolutely no intention would I ever offer something that would be disenfranchising anybody. But to mention also, Mr. Chair, that when you have an illegal vote that is cast, it also disenfranchises a legal eligible voter. So we need to protect in both ways. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
So with that, members, Senator Kiffmeyer moves that Senate File 1422 be recommended to pass and referred to Civil Law and Data Practices Committee. With that, members, all those in favor, raise your hand and vote, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay, and give me a thumbs down.
Nay.
Nay. With that, Senator Kiffmeyer, your bill, Senate File 1422, has passed, is on its way to Civil Law and Data Practices Committee. And with that, I will turn the gavel back over to Senator Kiffmeyer for Senator Ruud's Senate File 12.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members. That final bill that we have on our agenda today is Senate File 12. Senator Ruud, welcome to our committee. Glad to have you here today. And what a wonderful subject for today as we anticipate spring and ice fishing coming away and going into our wonderful summer fishing. So great subject. Welcome to the committee, and please say your name for the record and present your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Carrie Ruud, District 10. Today, and I guess I have to say good afternoon. I was planning on saying good morning, but I guess we're past that now. So, Madam Chair, thank you for hearing this bill today. I think you can see Senate File 12. I think you can see by the bill number, it gives you an idea of how what a priority this issue is for our resource. We introduced this bill last year to start a conversation across the state on the importance of this issue. And in the meantime, we've had many conversations across the state with many groups, anglers, guides, today. And so now with the enormous pressure on the resource during the pandemic, it's now time to be proactive on this. I think you can look and see that we have the highest angling license sales in 20 years. I think right now we're at 130,000 more fishing licenses than we had last year. So I want to thank the DNR for working with us on the language on this bill. We wanted to be consistent across the state so that it is for walleyes, the same language across the state of Minnesota instead of having special reg lakes here and special there. So they worked with us with the language. The language we have in this bill is the Lake of the Woods language. So it is 4 walleyes, 2 saugers, 1 over 20 inches. And with that, I know that time is of the essence. Many folks wanted to testify today, and like Ron Shera and the Lindners and many of the anglers and guides. But with me today, I have Nate Blasing, who has been really instrumental in helping me with this bill. He is with the Walleye Alliance, Inc., and also Brad Parsons, our fisheries commissioner.
Well, great to have you all here today. Senator Ruud, were you planning to have these testifiers speak today or be available?
Well, I think they're available. Nate Blasing would speak from the Walleye Alliance, and I think Mr. Parson is here in case people have questions.
Okay, well, let's go ahead with Mr. Blasing. If you would go ahead, and again, as you know, time is short. I hope you can summarize more. I would enjoy hearing more, but we're just short of time. Mr. Blasing.
Absolutely. Thank you. My name is Nate Blasing for the record. Madam Chair and members, I am president of the Walleye Alliance, Inc. organization. I'm also a fishing guide with S&W Guide Service, and I have been for approximately 20 years out of the Brainerd Lakes area. The Walleye Alliance is a grassroots nonprofit organization. Our mission statement is to advocate, educate, and promote responsible walleye fishing. One of our main goals is to ensure that future generations have quality walleye fishing opportunities in Minnesota. I'm here to speak in favor of Senate File 12, which would reduce the Minnesota statewide walleye limit from 6 down to 4. And this is meant to be an effort from Minnesota anglers for Minnesota anglers. The current 6 fish limit was actually enacted in 1956. and there has not been a change to that number since then. So in that time, there's been quite a few changes. A couple that I'm going to touch on are just the boats. Used to go out in a 12-horse boat with a 10-horse motor or oars. Now it's a 20-foot boat with a 200-horse motor. Also electronics. In 1956, boats did not have electronics. Now the boats have multiple graphs that show you the bottom contour, can mark fish, and also show you the direction that the fish are going. So quite a bit of changes there. Also, the fishing pressure has grown exponentially over the last 5 years or so. One of the big changes that is affected there is the amount of fishing pressure in the winter with wheelhouses and ice camping. Anglers are now able to spend around the clock time for multiple days fishing, whereas before it used to be go out for a couple hours at sunset in a portable fish house. Since COVID, the number of people fishing this past summer and winter has been incredible. And this is truly great to see since we encourage people to get out and utilize fishing. However, the added popularity has undoubtedly added pressure to the walleye populations across the state, especially at a time when the DNR is unable to do their normal egg take for stocking purposes due to COVID. Walleye fishing is at the heart of Minnesota tourism. It's a state fish and it drives vacations for families and friends. 90% of my clients, when I ask them what they want to target for species, they say walleyes. It is my professional experience that clients would rather have the opportunity to catch more walleyes and keep fewer. Minnesota is known for its great walleye fishing. We need to keep it that way. All bordering states and provinces currently have a daily limit ranging from 2 to 5 fish. Another benefit, as Senator Ruud touched on, is just the consistency. A lot of the big lakes, Lake of the Woods, Red Lake, Leech Lake, Vermilion already have 4 fish limits, so this would just make it more consistent. And it does not seem that it's affected tourism in those areas in a negative way. If nothing else, it's made it better. It's proven that if you have a healthy population of biting walleyes, fishermen will flock to that lake. So in closing, it's debatable whether a 6 to 4 changing the bag limit from 6 fish down to 4 fish will drastically change the walleye populations, or if it's more of a social change. However, I'm a firm believer that it cannot hurt. And with all the extra stressors walleye populations are experiencing currently, it's time for Minnesota to be proactive rather than reactive. Over the past 2 years, we've received input from thousands of anglers, sportsmen's groups, lake associations, and the feedback on this initiative has been overwhelmingly in favor of a limit reduction. Anglers are willing to take these self-regulating steps if it has the potential to increase walleye fishing potential in the future. I'd also like to thank the State Citizens Walleye Committee for their years of effort on this matter, and they also support it. So thank you very much for the time, and I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blazing. Mr. Parsons, I'll give you just a minute or so to just share a couple words of your support.
Yeah, thank Madam Chair, Senator Ruud, members, thank you for this opportunity. I'll keep it very brief. Mr. Blazing did a very good job of hitting the high points here. You know, this is it's been a great year for fishing. We're very excited that more people are getting out there. But we are seeing, we did not see record high on Mille Lacs this year, but we did see another record high ice fishing pressure on red, and it's spread all around the state. Mr. Blazing hit the nail on the head when he talks about winter pressure. Again, can I say that Lake X is going to get better right away because of this? No, I cannot. We don't have enough angler surveys, but thanks to a better appropriation a few years ago, we are doing more angler surveys and asking anglers about this question in particular. We've had very good support on that, and we intend to monitor this closely into the future. We manage almost 2,000 lakes for walleye. We stock them in almost 1,100. So it's a large portion of the state that we're helping here. And with that, I will stop, and if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parsons. And members, I think what also was impressive to me here was Ron Shera. I'll just read a little quote from his letter. 4 fish with 1/20 inches provides the DNR has the ability and flexibility to keep or impose new slot limits on select lakes when needed. So I appreciated his mentioning that, and that we have some flexibility there. And also from Mr. Newstrom, which was impactful to me in regards to saving fish for future generations of anglers. And I think that is really important. We want to have a good, solid basis for today and enjoyment today, but also saving for the future and with our kids and grandkids. Senator Ruud, also this particular bill is before us today because of rulemaking. And members, because of the structure of this particular rulemaking, directing the Commissioner of DNR to amend Minnesota rules. So they're not going into actual rulemaking in this particular case because it's directing them to do so. And because of that language, they may use a good cause exemption under statute section 14.388 and so on. But just to let you know, it is still rulemaking. That is the largest part of this bill, is the fact that it is, but because it's directing the commissioner, is not quite the usual rulemaking. Nonetheless, important to see it today. I see one hand, Senator Osmic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To either of the testifiers, one of the concerns I have is hooking mortality and its impacts on the population. Is this going to provide an impact on the hook mortality rate, or that we will see less dead fish on the shore? Do you have any information, or is there any intelligence on that based upon changing the limit?
Mr. Blazing, do you want to take that? Or who does?
Again, but I think I'd probably defer to Mr. Parsons. He might be more qualified to represent the DNR on that.
Okay, Mr. Parsons, in regards to the hook mortality impact.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator, thank you for your question. I do not believe that that will be the case. It's hooking mortality is primarily a function of water temperature and how people handle their fish. So if people are careful when they're releasing their fish, this should not add to it. There may be a few more walleye released because of this, but if people are smart about they handle fish, I would not expect to see that as having any real biological meaningful impact.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. Thank you, Senator Osmic. Okay, members, with that, this particular bill is being moved on to, I think, general orders. Is that right? Ms. James?
Correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, all right. So I will move, let's see who, I'll move Senate File 12 to be recommended to pass and to be referred to general orders. Members, please unmute and go on off video limits or come on video. And with that, members, all those in favor, Senate File 12, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion prevails. All right, Senate File 12 is on its way to the floor. Thank you, Senator Ruud.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members.
And with that, members, our agenda being concluded, we are adjourned.